They say every coordinate on Earth can be mapped, but I've seen places that don't exist, at least not according to our system. I'm a combat controller with the U.S. Air Force, embedded with special operations in Mali. My job's simple on paper: coordinate close air support, guide pilots to targets, and keep our teams alive on the ground. The software we use, Talon, doesn't make mistakes. Every grid, every decimal, every heat signature gets logged, verified, and executed with mechanical precision. Except when it doesn't. The first time it happened, I thought it was a glitch. We were tracking a convoy, unmarked technicals moving through the Adra de Sifogas range. Maybe smugglers, maybe worse. I entered the grid manually, double-checked the numbers, and sent the strike package request. The system stalled. The approval code didn't populate. Then, in red text across my display, rejected, coordinate outside authorized strike grid. That made no sense. We were deep inside the designated sector. I cross-referenced the lat-long on a separate device. It was fine. No restricted airspace, no friendly presence. Still, the strike wouldn't authorize. When I flagged it to command, they just said, "Skip that grid, proceed to secondary." No explanation. I thought it was a software quirk until it happened again and again. Every time, different coordinates, all within the same rough zone. A stretch of desert marked only by dry wadis and the faint remains of colonial-era roads. We started calling it the Ghost Grid. One night, while waiting out a dust storm inside the comms tent, our French liaison, old guy, served half his life in North Africa, leaned over and said, "You see red flag zones in Talon, yes? Don't send steel there. Don't even look." I asked him why. He just said, "Because those places have been gone for a long time."
After that storm, I couldn't stop thinking about what he said. Those places have been gone for a long time. Gone? What does that even mean? I'd seen the satellite overlays. The terrain was still there. Dunes, dry riverbeds, rocky escarpments. Empty, but there. So I started digging. Between sorties, I accessed our mission database, filtering for any strike requests in northern Mali rejected by Talon. Over 6 months, there were 23. All of them within a 40-kilometer radius. Same anomaly code. Restricted/ghost grid/classification level black. That last part caught my attention. Level black isn't a normal clearance. It means legacy restriction, something old, predating the modern system. When I asked command about it, I got silence. When I asked the French, I got history. The liaison, Captain Giroux, told me about the old French Foreign Legion reports from the 1950s. The area was once a chain of settlements along an oasis route. Then, in a single week, the entire region went dark. No bodies, no structures, just sand, as if the villages had never existed. French command at the time sealed off the region. They marked it as a zone d'anomalie humaine, human anomaly zone. Then, decades later, when the US inherited the mapping systems, those coordinates were automatically integrated as do not engage grids. No one ever updated them. No one ever removed them. But the strangest part? They're still active, meaning the system isn't just blocking the coordinates, it's detecting something there. Giroux showed me one of their old seismic maps from 1962. There was a pulse, rhythmic, consistent, every 9 hours, centered exactly in the middle of the exclusion zone. Not an earthquake, not man-made, just movement. That's when he said it. You can delete a place from a map, but if something's still moving under it, the system remembers.
2 weeks later, I got my chance. We were coordinating a multi-force strike near Gao. An insurgent convoy had broken from cover.
The mission grid was clear, but one of the targets, Echo Grid 7, bordered the exclusion zone. That's when it happened. The convoy feed from our Reaper drone flickered, the same camera that had been solid all morning. The telemetry froze, then reappeared. The target icons shifted slightly. I zoomed out. Echo Grid 7 had moved inside the restricted boundary. The system flagged it instantly, automatic abort. But the convoy was still there. I could see the trucks. I could see the heat signatures. Only they weren't moving forward. They were circling, slowly, like they were lost. And then the screen cut to static. When it came back, the trucks were gone. No explosion, no dust trail, nothing, just a distortion across the sand like a heat mirage, except it pulsed, like a heartbeat. I tried to run diagnostics. The drone's telemetry showed it had drifted 1 kilometer into the no-fly buffer before it lost control entirely. When we recovered the feed later, the final seconds were corrupted, except for a single frame that stayed intact. It showed 7 vertical shapes standing on the dunes. Tall, human-like but elongated. No faces, no visible movement, just silhouettes, spaced evenly apart, all facing east. The file metadata said the frame was captured at 0612 local time, dawn. Giroux went pale when he saw it. He said the French called them les veilleurs, the watchers. They'd been seen once before, in 1953, the same month the villages vanished. After that, we received a classified update from AFRICOM. Under no circumstances will air assets or personnel breach exclusion coordinates. Autonomous systems are authorized to self-terminate if drawn into restricted grid zones. I didn't know what that meant, self-terminate, until I read the maintenance logs for the recovered drone. The onboard AI had issued its own shutdown command before losing signal. Not out of malfunction, but to prevent transmitting something. They sent us in 3 days later. Officially, it was a recon and recovery op. Locate the lost drone, confirm no enemy forces had moved into the exclusion area. Unofficially, everyone knew we were being watched. The coordinates we entered were marked on our tablets with a red warning overlay, not from our system, but a French legacy code still embedded in the grid files. It said, Zone S47, do not engage, preserve geometry. I didn't know what that meant until we got there. The desert was dead quiet. No wind, no insects, no movement. Even the radios were off. We were told to use line-of-sight hand signals only once we crossed the boundary. By the time we reached the center of the grid, the air felt heavy, like the static before a thunderstorm. The light was strange too. The horizon shimmered as if the sky was bending, and the shadows stretched wrong, all angling toward the east no matter where you stood. Then one of the team found something. The drone's wreck wasn't scattered like from a crash. It was laid out neatly, wings detached, fuselage intact, as if placed there. And beneath it, in the sand, were tracks. Not tire marks, footprints. 7 sets of them. Each one almost 2 meters apart, perfectly straight lines heading away from the wreck toward the dunes. The spacing didn't make sense. Too regular, too long for any human stride. We followed them for about 200 meters before they just stopped. No fade out, no disturbance, just vanished. That's when the static started on our short-range headsets, a low-frequency hum that made our teeth ache. One of the guys, Torres, looked toward the ridge and froze. He said he saw figures standing there. I didn't see them. But when I lifted my binoculars, the glass fogged instantly from the inside, and for half a second, I swear, I saw shapes, 7 of them, all facing us. And then, nothing. Command pulled us out before dusk. They told us the exclusion zone wasn't a danger area, it was a containment field. Something was buried there, or sealed. Giraud later told me what the French records had called it, la anomalie du sable, the sand anomaly. They'd tried to cover it with geometry and code, a pattern designed to keep the watchers fixed in place. And every time modern systems targeted that location, the software recognized the anomaly pattern and refused to engage. Our tech wasn't glitching, it was obeying.
A week later, I was back at the Ops Center, reviewing satellite data from Mali's southern corridor, the same area where our exclusion zone had been logged. Only now, it wasn't there anymore. The coordinates had changed, shifted exactly 2.7 kilometers northeast. At first, I thought it was a map glitch, a projection offset, or an atmospheric recalibration. But when I compared time-stamped images, the same distortion pattern had moved across the terrain like a living shadow. Every sensor, thermal, radar, LiDAR, showed the same thing. A patch of space that didn't return data. A hole in reality that drifted slowly over the desert. The analysts called it a blind band. But I'd seen what was in it. 2 days later, we got another recon order. Observe, no engagement. Our team went up in a modified Osprey, equipped with multispectral scanners. When we reached the coordinates, the instruments began to fail one by one. Altitude sensors went first, then inertial navigation. By the time we were hovering over the coordinates, the altimeter was climbing even though we were stationary. From above, the desert looked wrong. There was movement, like the dunes were breathing. I zoomed in with the optical camera. For a split second, I saw what looked like a circle, a perfect spiral of sand depressions forming outward from a dark center. Then it collapsed, as if the ground itself had inhaled. That's when we got the order. Pull back, zone has shifted again. We turned west, but the shadow followed us. We landed back at base just after sunset. When I walked into the data center, the techs were staring at the live feed from orbital satellites. 3 new coordinates were glowing red across the Sahara, all marked as auto-rejected strike zones. They were aligned perfectly. And when connected, they formed a geometric shape, a 7-pointed figure. I asked Giraud what it meant. He said it wasn't the first time it had appeared. The French logs from 1956 described the same configuration. 7 moving sites across the desert that had to be constantly tracked and avoided. Only back then, they didn't have satellites. They relied on what the locals called les veilleurs du vent, the watchers of the wind. When the wind carried a low hum across the dunes, they said the watchers were shifting position, and every village in the path would vanish by dawn. That night, our base radar picked up faint echoes from those same coordinates. Not mechanical, not signal interference. They sounded like voices, faint, layered, repeating our call signs. When I tried to isolate the audio, the spectrogram displayed something impossible. The waveform wasn't random. It was structured, almost like language.
I asked the system to translate it. The autodecoder returned a single word: preserve.
I didn't sleep that night. Every monitor in the comms bay still displayed the same looping waveform. Steady, rhythmic, human in cadence, but inhuman in tone. When I played the raw transmission through headphones, it felt like the sound wasn't traveling into my ears, it was resonating behind them, like the voice was already inside the room, whispering through the static. Jeroen came in at 0300 with 2 cups of black coffee and a classified folder marked Spectral Echoes 1954-2022. Inside were waveform printouts going back 70 years, each identical to the one we just recorded. "Every few years," he said, "this pattern reappears, always tied to those 7 exclusion zones. French, American, Russian, doesn't matter. Everyone's equipment hears the same thing." He pointed to a note in the margin, handwritten in faded ink. "Va sous le vent. Don't speak back." The next day, we were told to initiate signal suppression protocol. Basically, jam every frequency between 2 and 30 megahertz near the exclusion zones. We powered up the transmitters. For the first few minutes, the interference worked. The channels went silent. Then something replied. It started as a feedback whine, then words. Our words echoed back in perfect imitation. Kodiak 1, grid clear. Kodiak 1, grid clear. Kodiak 1, grid. I froze. That was my voice. My exact phrase from 20 minutes earlier, distorted, replayed across every radio in the control bay. Giroux killed the transmitters, but the voice didn't stop talking. It kept talking even though our equipment was offline. We traced it to a nearby antenna array, the one tied to satellite comms. Power was disconnected, still transmitting. The signal had bypassed hardware. It was embedded in the spectrum itself, like something alive had learned how to speak through the noise. And every time we tried to silence it, it shifted to a new frequency, higher, clearer, almost conversational. One of the analysts leaned closer to the speaker. The moment she did, she whispered, "It's saying my name." We all heard it next, faint but precise. Elena. Command ordered an immediate lockdown of the comms wing. No one was allowed to transmit for 48 hours. But even during radio silence, every analog monitor flickered with faint audio residue. When filtered through a spectrum analyzer, the residual noise formed a repeating sequence. 7 peaks, 12 valleys. Giroux stared at it, muttering, 7 figures, 12 protocols. It matched the Ridge Watcher pattern from an entirely different conflict, one I'd studied in historical briefings. Different continent, same numbers, same formation. And that's when I realized whatever's out there, whatever those signals are, it's not isolated, it's connected. That night, before the blackout, I heard the voice one last time through my headset. No transmitter, no power, just silence. Do not forget the 7th. Then nothing. The waveform flatlined. But in the morning, a new exclusion zone appeared. Not in Mali, not in the Sahara, off the coast of Alaska.
2 weeks after Mali, I was reassigned to a joint tasking operation in the North Pacific, Naval Base Kitsap. No briefing, no context, just a single encrypted note. Monitor Arctic acoustic returns, compared to Mali waveform. That's when I saw it again. The same 7 peaks, same 12 valleys, only this time it wasn't traveling through air, it was moving through water. They called it the frost line. The sonar room was buried 3 decks below the tender ship USS Proteus. Every returning sub had to undergo hull acoustic cleansing, a decontamination procedure I'd never heard of before. Most of the crew thought it was about ice buildup, but the engineers knew better. They were listening for something attached. When the first sub came in from under ice patrol, the technicians played back its sonar logs. Between the engine hums and the ping returns, there was breathing. Slow, heavy, rhythmic, like a giant lung drawing from miles beneath the ice. Every vessel that operated past latitude 78 north came back with the same contamination, that sound, and a faint echo that matched the Mali signal pattern perfectly. Giroux, who'd somehow been transferred here too, looked pale when he saw the spectrogram. He said, "They're not separate. They're just speaking through different mediums now." We began analysis during the 3rd rotation. Protocol said to play the signal at low amplitude only, but one of the rookies, a sonar tech named Davis, accidentally looped it through the primary PA. The effect was instant. The lights dimmed, the air pressure dropped, like the ocean itself pressed down on the hull. And then for 11 seconds, every sonar return vanished. The ocean went quiet. When the systems rebooted, the sonar displayed 7 vertical returns, perfectly symmetrical, stationary, surrounding us. Davis stared at the screen and said, "Those aren't geological formations." He was right. Each return was oscillating slightly, like it was breathing back. Command ordered a shutdown of all sonar equipment, but before we could power down, a line of text appeared across the sonar interface. "Do not cross the frost line." We checked every connected system. None had external input, no uplink, no network access. The message wasn't transmitted, it was generated from inside the acoustic data itself. Giroux ran a diagnostic. The metadata contained an origin timestamp, 1954, the year of the first spectral echoes in Mali. Different hemisphere, same signal, same intelligence. That night I walked topside. The Arctic sky was black, the ice stretching endlessly towards the horizon, and in the distance, faint lights under the surface, drifting slow and deliberate, like lanterns deep in the water. I realized then, the frost line isn't a boundary. It's a warning. Something beneath the ice is still awake, and every signal, every echo, every interference pattern we've ever logged is just its way of reaching up.
We were told it was a maintenance dive. That's what they always say when they don't want the crew to ask questions. But everyone aboard the USS Proteus knew what we were really doing. We were going below the frost line. The submersible we used wasn't Navy standard issue. No markings, no registration, just matte black plating and an interface filled with programs labeled Project Deeplight, Aurora Record, and Spectral Node Access. Giroux was in the seat next to me, the only familiar face left since Mali. He looked exhausted. "We shouldn't go down there," he muttered. "It's not terrain, it's territory." I didn't ask what he meant. At 600 meters, the sonar started picking up anomalies, identical to the ones from the decontaminated hulls. 7 vertical returns forming a ring around us. Each pulse came a second later than the last, like a sequence, a countdown. At 800 meters, the lights hit the ice shelf from below. Only, it wasn't ice anymore. It was translucent, almost glass-like, with figures embedded within it. Not fossils, not debris, figures. Humanoid silhouettes frozen mid-motion, like they were reaching toward the surface. Their outlines shimmered faintly in the sonar glow, and the water temperature dropped 4 degrees in 30 seconds. Giroux whispered, "Those are crew. The missing subs. They're all here." But when we checked the sonar, the figures weren't solid. Their acoustic signatures were inverted, as if they were hollow impressions, sound carved out of silence. Then, the signal hit. It wasn't sound this time. It was pressure. Every sensor, every panel vibrated with a deep resonance that bypassed hearing. You didn't listen to it, you felt it. It spoke through the hull, through the steel, through bone. And underneath that vibration, words began to form in the static. You hear, because we are forgotten. You listen, because we are alone. Giroux started shaking his head. It's not talking to us, it's talking through us. The sub's depth gauge blinked, 1,000 meters. But the ocean floor here should have been at 900. We were descending into something that shouldn't exist. When we hit 1,050, the sonar cut out completely. No returns, no sound, no data. Just one last message that printed across the onboard log, in the same text from the acoustic contamination files. Surface now. Do not look directly into the reflection. I turned to Giroux, but he was staring at the viewport. The glass was glowing faint blue, like light shining through water. And in that reflection, I didn't see our faces. I saw 7 figures standing behind us, perfectly still, perfectly aligned. The next thing I remember was waking up back on the Proteus. No one spoke about what we saw. Command sealed our logs under subsurface interference event. Giroux didn't report for duty the next morning. His bunk was empty, his clearance revoked, and all records of his transfer vanished. 3 days later, the Proteus received one final sonar ping from beneath the Arctic shelf. 7 short bursts. Then, silence. But the waveform matched exactly the Mali signal. Same intervals, same harmonic distortion. The voice beneath the ice, the same one that spoke through the sand 70 years ago, had followed us. I still hear it sometimes, faintly through static, whenever I tune the radio past frequency limits. Always 7 tones, always rising, like something is climbing. And every time it fades, I remember the words etched into the acoustic logbook. The frost line is not a boundary, it's an invitation. If you've made it this far, the next declassified entry links everything together from Mali to the Arctic. YouTube thinks these 2 stories are the ones you should see next. To Project Deeplight, the submarine that never surfaced, and Echo Sierra, the signal that spoke our names.